Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to my July wrap-up. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of July. So in July I read 12 books, one of which was the unpublished novel of a writer friend of mine, so I cannot talk about that. But I will talk about the 11 books that I can talk to you about today. This July wrap-up will also include everything I read during the booktubeathon. I didn't manage to complete all the challenges. I read 5.5 books in the week. I didn't read my book about someone different from me, although I feel like enough of the books I read were about people who are different from me. I also didn't complete the challenge of reading a book outside because it rained a lot in London that week. But anyway. So to begin, as always, with the classics, I read 4 Victorian things this month, 2 of which were rereads. So one was The Netherworld by George Gissing. This was a reread for me. I read it about 4 years ago now, probably. I read it for my final year at university where I studied it in a Victorian literature module, and I love this book a lot. It is very miserable. If you like Thomas Hardy, I would highly recommend George Gissing, because he's like Thomas Hardy but set in the city, but similar in sort of themes and misery and incredible writing and brilliant characters and like heart-wrenching amazingness. The Netherworld is set in Clerkenwell in the 1870s, and it follows a series of characters who are sort of on the poverty line and below, who have really difficult lives, who are part of what Gissing calls the Netherworld. One is Jane Snowdon, a young girl who's been brought up by people who did not want her, who are incredibly cruel to her, and at the beginning of the book finds her grandfather, and this begins like a new journey in her life. And another central character is Sidney Kirkwood, who is a young man who has kind of been bitterly disappointed by what his life has given him. Not that his life is so hard, but that he thinks it could have been and should have been better, and he sees so much despair and misery around him, and that bothers him. It's such an utterly incredible book. I love it a great deal. I read this for the Not So Hypothetical Victorian Literature Course series, where I talked about how the city as a thing is presented in this and Mary Barton. I think I've mentioned this on this channel before. The first time I ever read The Netherworld several years ago, I started writing a modern retelling of The Netherworld. I've only ever done that for 2 books. One is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, and the other is this. And I got a fair amount through it. I think I wrote about 70,000 words of it. I haven't looked at it for ages. It was only about halfway through. But I was so inspired by The Netherworld, and I felt that so much of what Gissing says was still relevant today that I like went away and wrote that. And I'd forgotten how much I love this and how I think it is so utterly brilliant. And it has some of the most poignant and heart-wrenching bits in all of literature, and I think it's one of the best Victorian novels ever written. Another reason I really enjoyed reading this time was to do with where it's set. When I first read this, I didn't know Clerkenwell at all. For the whole of 2016, I worked in offices in Clerkenwell. Like literally the first page of The Netherworld is a man walking across Clerkenwell Green. The offices I worked at were on Clerkenwell Green, and I know like every single street that Gissing mentions in this, and it's fascinating. It's like a wonderfully imaginative journey to like read about all of these streets that I knew and how they used to be. So that was great. That was lovely. I would highly recommend this. It's so good. It's so good. And then also for the Not So Hypothetical Victorian Literature Course series, I reread Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell, which is another of my favourite books. It's wonderful. This is my second favourite Gaskell after North and South. It is set in Manchester in the 1830s and 40s, around the time of the Chartist movement. Mary Barton, the central character, is a seamstress, the daughter of a factory worker, and she is torn between 2 romantic suitors, one of whom is Jen, her sort of long-term friend, a young man of the same class as her who she's known all her life, and the other is a man called Harry Carson, who is this gentleman who she thinks will be able to make her into a lady. It is the single most exciting Victorian novel I have ever read. I think it is the most page-turnery Victorian book that's out there. The thing I love about Mary Barton is you're reading it, and for the first sort of half of the book, the first 200 pages, it's slow and calm and interesting, and you're getting into all the characters and you're not really sure where it's going, and then a thing happens and you're like, oh, I didn't expect that to happen, and everything goes mad, and it's brilliant. It's so good. It's so gripping and wonderful. I will say, if you do read the Penguin Classics edition, do not read the blurb, because it tells you about the thing that happens halfway through, which changes everything, which is really dramatic, and I really think they shouldn't say it on the blurb when it's 200 pages in. But I have this problem all the time with classics and the blurbs with the spoilers, because classics have plots that should be enjoyed too. Anyway. And then I read another Elizabeth Gaskell book, and this is a novella called A Dark Night's Work. This is my favourite book of the month and one of my favourite books of the year so far, probably joint with A Small House at Allington for being like my favourite new discovery, my favourite book that wasn't a reread. I feel like Elizabeth Gaskell's main novels are spoken about a decent amount on BookTube and in the world, but her novellas and shorter works are seriously underrated. A Dark Knight's work is quite a long novella. I would probably class it as a novel, though most like things online seem to class it as a novella, but it's an absolutely brilliant Elizabeth Gaskell thing. I'd never heard of it before. I found it just because I was trying to read everything by Elizabeth Gaskell, and I really highly recommend it. I'm not sure how much it is in print, but you can get it for free on Kindle if you have an e-reader. In some ways it has a similar structure to Mary Barton. We have a kind of nice, enjoyable setup. We have this young girl, she lives with her father, her mother is dead. She has a close relationship with her father, although he seems to be struggling in his business, which does sort of cause a little bit of a rift between them. She meets this young man who comes to study with their local clergyman, they fall in love, everything seems to be going well, and then one dark night, something goes terribly wrong and everything gets exciting and dramatic. Like Mary Barton, from like a third to a half of the way through, A Dark Knight's work is incredibly exciting and dramatic and pacey and just awesome, just really good. I was so startled because although I really love a lot of Elizabeth Gaskell novellas, in general they don't come close to her actual novels for me. But A Dark Knight's work beats Sylvia's Lovers, beats Ruth, beats Cranford, beats Wives and Daughters for me, and is right up with Mary Barton and North and South as being like one of my favourite Elizabeth Gaskell things. I loved it, it was great, it was so good. I have to say, I think I have come to a decision, and I think I would like to declare that Elizabeth Gaskell is my second favourite author and Jane Austen has been pushed down to third place. Not because I don't love Jane Austen, but just because Elizabeth Gaskell is so thoroughly awesome. Then a very quick little Victorian read, I read Lord Arthur Saville's Crime by Oscar Wilde. This is a short story of his which I picked up during the BookTubeathon. It was supposed to be my book to read outside, but it rained so I didn't. I read it on a train. But I really enjoyed this. It was just good fun. I really like Oscar Wilde a lot and I find him so funny, and this, I mean, it's basically just like a long extended joke, but it's a very good joke, so I kind of forgive him. And he writes with such panache and wonder and such humour and wit, and I feel like when you read Oscar Wilde you know that he's really enjoyed writing it, which I like. I also enjoyed that a character from one of his plays, Lady Windermere from Lady Windermere's Fan, turns up in this. It made me very happy because I love that play, so yes, an enjoyable read. On to contemporary literature, and I'll start off with the historical fiction. This month I finished listening to on audiobook Lustrum by Robert Harris. This is the second book in the Cicero series. This is a trilogy of books looking at the character of Cicero, who was an actual real life person from ancient Rome, taking the historical facts we do know about his life and kind of filling in the gaps. They're kind of political thrillers, I guess, or novels of political intrigue, I don't know, but I just absolutely loved it, as I loved the first one. They're so dramatic and pacey, and Robert Harris clearly knows his stuff so well, and I love it, and I find it just historically fascinating, and I find the relationships between the characters and the way that Cicero is presented, also the way that his wife Terenzia and his slave Tyro, the narrator, is presented, I think is absolutely wonderful, and they're such a brilliant series, and I would highly recommend them. And then another historical fiction novel. This month I also read The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. Finally, I finally got to this and read it. I really enjoyed this. I'm not sure that I loved it, though maybe I loved it a little bit, but I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. I think the problem with The Essex Serpent was that I'd heard so much about it, and not that I'd heard so many good things about it that I was expecting it to be brilliant. It wasn't that specifically. I think it's more that I'd seen a lot of reviews of it on BookTube and like in the world, and heard a lot of people talk about specific things about it, and so I had a very clear image in my head of what it was going to be, and it wasn't exactly that. The Essex Serpent is set in the 1890s in the late Victorian period and follows a character called Cora Seaborn after the death of her husband. She moves to Essex with her son and there gets kind of involved in this kind of rumour going round about this mysterious, mythical Essex serpent that might be in the town. And it's about her relationship with various different characters around her, and specifically about her relationship with a man called Will, who is the reverend of the town where she moves to. So there were some things I loved about this. Specifically the character of Spencer, who I adore. I loved so many of the characters. I think I probably loved all of the characters. I thought it was beautifully written, really wonderfully, amazingly written. I think there were a few plot points that I didn't love. The end of the 5th chapter of September, I felt, was an artistic mistake. There were a few other plot points like that that I didn't think completely worked and added to the narrative and the themes in the way that I would have liked it to. And the other thing I found was that it didn't feel that Victorian to me. It gives the year this book is set in on the blurb. It doesn't actually mention that year anywhere in the book, and if I hadn't had that on the blurb, I probably would have pegged this as like 1910 rather than 1890s. I did sometimes find the language, and especially the language in which the characters write to each other in letters, to be a bit anachronistic. However, I still really loved it, and there were so many things I did enjoy about it, and I thought the characterization and the writing was in general wonderful. So I don't know, I have muddled, conflicting feelings on this that I'm still trying to puzzle out. I might film an entire review of this because I feel like I have enough to say to warrant a full review. I did still like it a lot, just I thought it would be like one of my favourite books of the year, and it's not. It was a very, very good 4-star read, but it wasn't quite as up my street as I thought it would be. Then I read The Threat Level Remains Severe by Rowena Mcdonald. This, like the Epic Serpent, was also a read for the Booktubeathon, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. This was very kindly sent to me for review. This is Rowena Mcdonald's debut novel. It came out really, really recently, just last month. I read her short story collection, Smoked Meat, back in February, and it was been one of my favourite books of this year, and this was another brilliant read. The Threat Level Remains Severe follows a character called Grace, who is a kind of admin assistant working in the House of Commons, which was just a wonderful, fascinating place to have a book set anyway. And it follows the dynamic in her office with one of her new colleagues, and also her relationship with this kind of man who she's been talking to online but she hasn't met. One thing I loved about this was the kind of excitability and the tension and surprise of the drama. It reminded me in pacing of Mary Barton and A Dark Knight's work. I've had a lot of really great reads this month for being a kind of medium-paced first half where you're interested in the characters, you're kind of wondering where it's going, and then there's like a moment and everything changes humongously. And I love that in books. I find it so exciting. I think because I enjoy a quiet, character-driven story, but I also like some drama and some page-turning excitement. I also just love the characterization in here, and I think Rowena Mcdonald is a master of character. I think as well she's wonderful at doing characters who are sympathetic and dislikable all at once, in that by the end of this book, the 3 main characters I both disliked and felt sorry and liked all of them at the same time. It's interesting because the main character, Grace, is someone who sort of on paper I would like as a character, and yet as the book goes on there are things about her which I started to like much less. And there is this character, Brett, who is very corporate, very self-important, very arrogant, and in so many ways someone I wouldn't like. The way she presents him means that slowly you have so much more sympathy for him and you grow to understand this person so much better, and I think that's wonderful. This is a brilliant read, and I would highly recommend it. I think Rowena Mcdonald is a massively talented author, and I'm definitely looking forward to everything she writes in the future. Next I have 2 short story collections. The first is Julie Oringer's How to Breathe Underwater, which I also read for the Booktubeathon. This is a short story collection I've been meaning to get to for a while. I read the first story back when I did the Try a Story tag ages ago, and I didn't like the first story very much, which was a surprise to me because I had heard so many people on BookTube say that this was their favourite short story collection ever, so I kind of put it down and didn't go on with reading it, but I decided to pick it up this month again and read through the rest of it. And I had very mixed feelings on this. Short story collections can often be hit and miss, but I think this is probably the most hit and miss short story collection I've read that's all written by the same author. Like, there are some stories in here I absolutely thought were amazing. The third story in the book, The Isabel Fish, is one of the best short stories I've ever read. Really beautiful, really moving, really subtly and brilliantly done, and so powerful and incredible. But there are other stories in this that I didn't get much out of, although I thought were overdone. I think there is a tendency in this short story collection to veer towards the melodramatic, and some of the things that occur in some of these stories become so dramatic and so over the top and so far-fetched that they kind of lose their poignancy and lose their emotional complexity and intensity, which I felt was a shame. At the same time, there are some stories in here that are absolute gems, so I do think this is worth a read. Then I read this short story collection by David Eagleton, which is Some 40 Tales from the Afterlives. I really enjoyed this. It was bizarre but very great. My brother recommended this to me and said I would like it, and I definitely did. It is, as the title suggests, 40 Tales from Afterlives. It presents 40 different possibilities of things that might happen after death, which are all quite surreal and bizarre. But one of the things I loved about this so much was that David Eagleman gives you all these strange, bizarre circumstances, these strange possible afterlives in a very matter-of-fact way. His writing is beautiful and very elegant, but it's also very matter-of-fact, and that I think just really worked and was really effective, because I can see a way that this could have been written where I wouldn't like it, but as it was, I really enjoyed it. The only thing I probably will say was that I read this in one day, and I would possibly recommend not reading it in one day, because after 40 afterlives, they get a little bit samey, and I feel like they wouldn't if you read a few at a time, but reading them all in one sitting is possibly not the best way to experience this. but a great book nonetheless. Then I read a non-fiction book this month, which was scribbled in the margin by 50 Internal Delights of Books, where he basically talks about 50 of his favourite things about reading books. This was quite enjoyable. It was fun. It was a little bit nothingy for me. I think the problem I had with this was that it was very impersonal and generic, and every delight of reading books was formed as this is what readers are like, this is what you're like, and it was never personal. There were like 2 moments where the author had like anecdotes from his own life, and I liked them because I thought that was nicer. And the connection we have with books as people tends to be really personal, so it was a shame that there wasn't more of that in there. And I think this is the kind of book that people would be picking up for the title, not for the author. But I still feel like I would have liked some personal element in it. I think that would have been a book I would have enjoyed more. Like, this was fun, it was enjoyable, it was nice, but it wasn't very much, I suppose. And finally this month I have a poetry collection. This is Love and Loss and Other Important Stuff by Jonathan Pinnock. I actually know Jonathan quite well. We were on the same creative writing masters together, and I have had the pleasure of reading quite a lot of his prose in the past, but I had never read any of his poetry. He very kindly sent me a review copy of his new collection, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, because I'm familiar with Jonathan's prose, I was expecting this to be funny, but I was delightedly surprised at how witty this is, because I've just never read comic poetry before, really, and I didn't really know if it was something I would like. This is absolutely hilarious and really good fun. Very good writing, but it doesn't take itself too seriously, and what I really enjoyed about this is how it mocks poetry. There's a lot of very self-reflective, self-conscious poems about poetry and about poets, which are wonderful, and there's just a lot of wonderful silliness in this. There is a poem called Swedish Love, which is a love poem incorporating as many names of IKEA brands as possible. My boyfriend Nick, in fact, read this a couple of weeks after me, and it was a great joy to listen to him read this, because I was sat across the other side of the room writing, and I could just hear him laugh like every now and then at a funny bit, because it is laugh out loud funny, and it is great fun. I'm going to read you the beginning of the first poem in this collection, which is called Author's Note, and is probably my favourite poem. This collection of poems, hereinafter referred to as the collection, has been checked for compliance with Poetry Society Guideline 17B, POSOC 17B, and has been given a Level 4 certification. To achieve Level 4 compliance, rhyming content has been restricted to under 10% of the total wordage, and all poems about cats have been excised. Those are all the books that I read in the month of July. I hope you have enjoyed my reading wrap-up, and please let me know down below in the comments if you have read any of these books and what you have been reading in July, how your reading month has been. Also, just as a general notice, I am moving to a new flat in the next couple of weeks, so I have pre-filmed quite a few videos, but I don't know how long it'll take us to get sorted and to have a place to film and internet to upload with, so video postage may be a bit irregular for the next month, but we shall see. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back quite soon with another bookish video.